probably gonna stay 1.5 hours here, so I'm gonna put the timer already. I wasn't gonna stream today, but I decided to do because I said I was gonna do it yesterday, I think. But I spent several hours trying to figure out, and I still haven't figured out how to make Pixie work with Svelte. It's very frustrating because it's very hard to find information about this because at least now I know what the problem is. I managed to make it work with like vanilla JS, but I think the problem is the server-side rendering from Svelte. And then I spent a bunch of time trying to figure out. I read the documentation several times. I read the divide documentation, trying to change the Svelte config and the Vite config, and I tried multiple different things here, the way that I'm importing, and nothing seems to work. So I think that I will either go back to the way that I was doing before and try to do it that way, which I think is going to be harder. But at least that way I know that it works because I remember that I made it work, the simple visualization. Or I think I'm gonna spend, like right now I'm gonna spend more time trying to study this, trying to see if I can figure out. But then probably tomorrow I will try to go the other route. So delete everything that I did here and then go back to the way that I was doing before. And maybe I will consider even doing with vanilla JS. Like I don't understand why. Maybe it's not that common for people to build, but it seems like it should be like a common problem that people have, like when building stuff with the canvas. And I don't understand why it's so hard to find information on how to deal with the like libraries that depend on the client when using server-side rendering applications or frameworks. But it might be something that I'm missing as well. I don't know. It's really frustrating. And as far as I understand now, Vite is kind of like a tool, like a webpack. It's used to compile the JavaScript code and HTML code. And it sends requests to get the modules. So it parses the import statements and sends requests. And then you can set the configurations here. And I couldn't figure out, like there is some stuff in the documentation, but it's not like, I couldn't understand really well how it works, the configurations and how exactly this is working, like how does the command work. But then to figure out that, I think I would have to search for how the yarn dev command works and then figure out how to, because everything starts from yarn dev and then it triggers these files somehow, which I don't really understand how. And then these files compile, so I would have to see if I can figure out the how to find the source code to see how this stuff is being compiled, so I can understand how the framework or the tool is creating the server-side rendering and separating. So as far as I understand on Svelte, you have both things that are happening. First, it renders everything on the server side if you're using Svelte Kit, and then after that, it hydrates things on the client. So hydrating is just another word for updating, I think. So it initializes everything on the server, and then it initializes again on the client. So, and then you can have, and this is the part that I don't understand really well, because in the documentation, I tried this stuff as well. They say that you can create another page here, plus page.js, and then in the page.js you can put a function called load, and then from that function you can decide, you can put some variables that are going to tell whether or not the page is going to load on the server or on client side. But I tried that and it didn't work. I was getting some errors, and I tried a bunch of different variations and it didn't work. And I also tried to put the scripts in the main page, the app.html, and it doesn't work as well. If we put the pixie directly, like getting the source code from this file here. So you can both change configurations on the define config here on the Vite, and then you have the configurations on this Svelte, which is these adapters here, but this is more related, I think, to stuff on the deployment. And from the stuff that I've seen in the documentation, I have several options for depending on where you're gonna deploy. You put a different adapter here. So I guess I have to see if I can try to understand how the source code works. And I think that the Vite is written in Go from what I've seen. And that's one of the reasons why it's a lot faster than Webpack. And the biggest issue with trying to understand this is then it might be a massive rabbit hole, and then I will lose a bunch of time. And I haven't even started doing the actual stuff that I'm gonna have to do. To load the graph and do all of the other stuff, which is also gonna be extremely difficult. So my biggest concern is just the time, how much time I have. Because the more time I spend on this, the less time I have to actually build stuff.
You have made it. This is Open Source Friday. It's a Friday where we talk to open source maintainers about the projects they work on. Sometimes we actually contribute to projects, sometimes we build projects, and I'm super stoked to have Evan you here. Evan,
hello.
Welcome. Just above your head, you've got the Vue logo, and you're creator of Vue, maintainer, one of the maintainers of Vue as well. And why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us why you're here today?
Sure. My name is Evan Yu, and I wrote Vue.js. I'm the team lead of Vue.js. But in the past few months, I've also been working on a project called Vite, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. So Vite was initially created somewhat related to Vue, but now it kind of evolved into its own thing. And I'm kind of hoping that it can benefit developers, especially front-end developers, not just Vue users, like all front-end developers.
Excellent. Yeah, and it's funny because I know we chatted was it last week for a completely different project, but I never heard Vite said out loud. Yeah, and I always called it Vite.
Yeah, a lot of people discovered that. I don't know. Like I picked the name. It's actually a French word. In French, it means fast or quickly. So I thought it's cool to stick to its original pronunciation. But we are now kind of
yeah, it's Vite, and I keep saying Vite. But I guess you should say it like Vite.
In a dilemma, because some people are like, if Vite is pronounced in the French way, then why isn't Vue pronounced in the French way? Because Vue is actually a French word as well. So to that, my only explanation is just stick to whatever the author prefers, I guess.
Yeah, and sorry, I was just messing with the screens because I did see that somewhere. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
French word for fast. So all the tips on how to speak French is right here in the README as well. So appreciate y'all doing that. Excellent. So I guess what's the high level of what Vite is? Like fast is one of the keywords, but like how would you describe it?
Yeah, it's actually a little hard, which is why every time people ask me to explain what it is, like there's no really concise one sentence description of it. But if you want to make a comparison, like if you've been using, I think the closest thing in existence is Parcel, like in terms of what it does and what it kind of affords you. But Parcel Bundler.
Yeah, Google's not helping me today.
Yeah, but obviously, like the difference is in how it's implemented, and in terms of how the dev server works, it's fundamentally different. But in terms of what it does, you can think of it as something that takes some of your code and serve it. Yeah, I think it's really interesting because it's a dev server and a pre-configured bundler all in the same thing. So like we can call it a front-end build tool, but that's so generic. People just kind of, it doesn't really explain anything in itself. So I'm kind of struggling to come up with a really concise way to describe what it is, which is why like I kind of want to do this live stream because I think it's actually easier to just show people like what it does and how it works. So you get a very direct understanding of, oh, this is what it does. Like this is what Vite is.
Yeah, and I think we're actually, so I do a lot of front end myself. I come from a React background. I've got some few projects too on GitHub as well. And I feel like we're going through evolution that we're sort of seeing. I think we saw this 5 years ago, probably longer than that with like Webpack and how folks have sort of adopted that type of bundler. And I'm not trying to keep bundlers, as a one-to-one comparison because I know you're having trouble describing what this is. But I think we are looking through an evolution. I think we're now seeing even some of the hosting providers who are now adding all these bells and whistles and new features. Like we're ready for the next wave, and that's why the stream is called the next frontier. Or actually, what is the stream called? I accept the title and I don't even know what it's called. But the next front-end tooling system generation. That's what it was.
Yep.
But yeah, excellent. So why Vite at this point in time?
So I think Vite is essentially like a Vite alongside Snowpack, MR, web dev server. I think we all come at a time where native ES modules has finally somewhat reached. It's close to being universally available, finally. Right? If we disregard IE11, then the latest version of all these major browsers all support native ES modules. It's now usable in Node.js as well. So the ecosystem is finally now starting to do this sort of huge migration where everyone is finally, okay, we have a standard module system now, and it runs natively in the browser. So a lot of the assumptions about tooling, especially like for tooling, if you assume that all the code is going to be standard ES modules, you can link up a lot of stuff. You can delegate a lot of stuff to browsers or some tools that just handle specific parts of the workflow faster than existing tools. And I think that's where this next generation of tools is going to be focused on is, finally we have this native standard module system that's going to be somewhat universal. And how can we sort of reimagine the tooling and just kind of take this opportunity to rethink what a clean slate or a faster version of what we are doing today could be like.
Yeah. So speaking of fast, I know we prepared to share some screens too as well. I don't know if you want to jump in and give like high level of what to do with Vite and how to sort of get installed or involved with the project.
Sure. Yeah. So I think I'm just going to start sharing my screen right now because I think that's going to be the. All right. So yeah. So this is my screen, and if you want to get started, it's going to ask you to use Node.js and like use this Vite.js app. But this is really for for people who don't want to go through like kind of stuff. But like today we're not going to do that. So what I want to do today is just like here is a fresh demo. Like I have an empty demo folder. There's nothing here, so I'm just going to do yarn add Vite, yarn add b Vite. Probably gonna make this bigger. So I just installed it. It doesn't scroll to the end. Why? Okay, so install pretty fast. So Vite is, let's take a look at the node modules. It's 80 megabytes. So it's also very small amount of modules that's actually being installed because we pre-bundle most of them to just make sure the install is faster. This is why compared to something like maybe Create React app, you're probably gonna see a noticeable difference in terms of just installing this thing itself, like how much faster it is. So now we have this thing here. Yeah, so I have these. Let's just ignore all of the existing stuff. I'm just going to
Can you explain what we're looking at too as well? These are the node modules?
Yeah. So this is just, after you run npm install yarn add, this is just what it creates. Just doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to create an index.html file and say hello. And then I'm going to, so you can do npm vite here.
Might have to raise up your terminal window a little bit.
Okay, let's just move it here then. Okay, or I'm going to just go in here, add a script. So I'm going to say dev vite. And then, move this up, yarn, dev. So I started dev server. Notice that I didn't do anything other than just running this, right? So you can kind of think, so at the bare minimum, think of it as a static file server, right? You probably use something like serve or like HTTP static server, whatever, like whatever static file server you use to locally serve a directory of static files, right?
Yeah.
Think of Vite, the Vite command does that, right? At the bare minimum. So you see hello, and that's the index.html being served.
So this is kind of like the, so I use a lot like npx serve to serve npm file. Are you talking about that package?
Yeah.
Okay, so far out of the box, I can get a very similar command to serve the static files.
Yeah, right. So it's a static file server, but obviously it's not meant for serving it in production, right? Because it does all these development stuff. So I edit and save and just, we get like page reload out of the box. And with native modules, with native ESM, you can do script type of module, right? So you can do, you can either do import here in line. Let's just do that, actually, main.js. So it tells you it failed to resolve main.js because it doesn't exist. So I'm going to create that here. And so reload the page. So make sure the console actually locks hello. So you also see this Vite connecting, which is our hot module replacement client that's being run. So if you edit your file here, it also reloads the page. And you can see this main.js file has been updated and reloaded. So this is not real hot module replacement going on because this is just simply reloading the page. But it tracks all the things that's being imported from your index.html to know that if you edit this file, I need to reload the page. If you edit other things, I don't need to care about it. And then some of the common stuff that we may want to do is like link to CSS files. So let's just say style.css, each one color red. You can obviously just use a link, right? So style.css. So notice here I can, because it's an actual HTTP server, you can use like absolute paths here. It's just like what you'd expect. So we got this thing showing red on the screen. And if I edit it here,
So you're mentioned about the absolute paths. Someone's asking in the chat how to use Vite from another folder than just root.
how to use it from another folder?
Yeah, so I guess if you had like your CSS in like a styles folder, or I guess you could still do relative paths too.
Yeah, you can do relative paths. You can even alias stuff. It also follows all the npm node modules resolve algorithm, which we'll show in a bit. But as you can see, like even via the simple link here, and notice how when I edit this thing, the page actually didn't reload. It's hot updating the CSS in place.
So what's making that work? Is it Vite's
magic.
server? Magic? Okay.
Yeah, so Vite is doing the work of recording the relationship. So one thing I kind of want to point out is like when a lot of users coming from Webpack, they're so used to thinking of this main.js as their entry point of application and HTML being the afterthought. So in Vite, it's kind of think of it as a server. So your HTML is actually your entry point, and Vite actually parses everything here to consider it a module graph entry. So style CSS is considered part of the module graph. This thing is turning into an inline module, and which imports this main.js, which is another module. So notice how like index HTML is actually the entry point to application, and it's kind of from there we construct the whole module graph of the application instead of like we're going from here, then we're going backwards to figure out what HTML should be. Right? So that's kind of a thing a lot of people kind of have to sort of flip a switch in order to get into Vite. I think Parcel does this too, right? So Parcel is kind of the pioneer of this concept of HTML being your entry and being part of the module graph. And I think that's kind of the for web development in particular. This is just for me, it's a more natural sort of mental model to work with. But yeah, wait, right? So what Vite does under the hood is we actually record all these import relationships between the HTML and the CSS files. So we get to actually just update this link CSS in place. And so that's right. This is not too much different from say a static file server. So some of the things we also do out of the box is let's say we have style.module.css. I'm going to say
what's the module keyword? I've actually not seen that before.
Right, so this is convention, right? So if you've worked with CSS modules, it's kind of convention to name your files with this module.css postfix. And in Vite, this is also convention. So if we see a file named like this, and I'm going to say text color red, and then I'm going to comment out this one, and I'm going to say import classes from style.module.css. Let's just log this, and as you can see, it gives you this object with text in it. So this is a class name. So I'm going to say document.querySelector h1.className equals classes.text. And now we get red here. So if we edit this thing here, it also reloads. So this is not how much replacement, but you get the idea, right? So we have a lot of these vague conventions here. So imagine if you previously had a project with plain Webpack, and now you say I want to work with CSS modules. You probably have to go to a guide to teach you what CSS loader is, what style loader is,
I definitely didn't know that path.
then you need to look at all the post CSS configurations for CSS loader, add those loaders to your Webpack config, and you get what I mean, right? So the idea of Vite is it's pretty opinionated. It has a lot of these kind of things built in, and to sort of minimize the hoops you need to jump through to get certain things working. Similarly, if you want to have custom post CSS configs, so you just add a post CSS config thing, you export a post CSS config. So this is similar to how you get Tailwind CSS working, because Tailwind itself is really a post CSS plugin, right? So if you want to configure Tailwind with Vite, let's see, how can we get that working? I probably need to go to Tailwind CSS. And I'm going to look for Vite. I think there is a guide with Vite here. Yes.
So while you're looking for that, there's some question that came in the chat. Is there something like Create React App? Is there like an eject feature, or is you just get Vite and that's it?
So here's the thing: like there's really no need to eject. So Vite has its own configuration format, but it's not based on Webpack. The idea is CSS module is something that just works in Vite. There's really like if you want to configure it, if you can, you just create a Vite config.js. You can say export default CSS modules. Then these options will be passed on to the post CSS modules plugin. So you can configure like locus convention to be camel case only if you want. Like if you use CSS modules, you know what this does. But like most of these built-in stuff is also configurable. But the thing is, my personal opinion is because I've worked, we maintain Vue CLI for Vue, right? Vue CLI is built on top of Webpack, and we ship a lot of these stuff out of the box in Vue CLI as well. So we have a similar way. If you use Vite with Vue, you almost get identical feature set with Vue CLI in terms of what you can do with source code. But we have to maintain a pretty complicated Webpack config internally, and when people want to configure that, it's typically quite involved. And the idea with Vite is we essentially extracted a lot of these things that we know like users will need this in a typical project, and also because over time it kind of in Vue CLI we've come to the conclusion like this is kind of the sensible default. Most people will want this, so that's how we're going to present it in Vite by default as well. And if there are certain things that we know that users will want to customize, we expose them via an option. And the plugin system of Vite is also pretty flexible, but I don't think we want to dig into that just as yet.
Yeah, so I guess understanding these conventions, like I always talk about the bundlers and how we sort of advance and now where everybody's got like new things looking forward, like the next generation. I love the fact that there are strong opinions happening now in front end the JavaScript world, because when you talk about like Webpack, like I'm triggered where I've definitely gotten to the point where I want to use this new thing, like Tailwinds at the time, but I don't know how to get it like in my Webpack config, and there's sometimes some hoops I have to jump through, sometimes two different plugins that are competing against each other for space, and sometimes I need both of them. And I've sort of been burned out enough about that situation, but it sounds like it would be a lot of stuff that's working out of the box. Yeah, I think it's so being more strong opinion. I think it's just the different value proposition and different sort of how at which level the tool wants to live at. Yeah. Webpack itself, I think, is still kind of very low level. The downside is when you have such a low level abstraction and you want to allow all the higher level features to be configurable in user space, the complexity just explodes. Yeah. Whereas if the tool comes in and say, hey, I just want to be opinionated, so I can manage much more for the user, and because the tool gets to manage all these things together, so the tool gets to sort of work all these systems in a somewhat smoother because you have more control at the tool layer instead of forcing the user to figure out all these how to get plugin feature A to be compatible with feature B and all that. Right? Yeah. And I think it's not necessarily saying like I think it's actually a miracle that you can make all these things work with Webpack, just like looking at all the plugins and loaders that you put together. But you know, like if
over time, I think we come to the conclusion that most users don't really want to deal with that. So if the tool can sort of already handle most of these stuff in an opinionated way for them, they're happy to sort of just follow along. And I think that takes time too, because like we as an ecosystem, as a community, we needed something to pave the way, like Webpack, right? Then we try to put all these things together on top of Webpack. Then we realize, okay, we finally come to this sort of almost a shared convention, like how we deal with CSS, how we deal with certain types of features, right? So if you look at things across like Create React App or VCLI or Next.js, a lot of stuff is shared, right? We're doing a lot of similar stuff on top of Webpack. So I think we finally reached a time where most users almost take some of these as sort of granted. They think, oh, it's natural that I'm able to import CSS. It's natural that I'm able to just use post CSS out of the box. So I think Vite is just in some way it's like, okay, if that's what people are used to already, then we can sort of just go directly to provide it out of the box, right?
Yep. And so, question. So we saw you do a bunch of commands with Vite. How about like how do we compare this with the VCLI? Are they going to be working together eventually, or do they work together today?
They don't work together today because VCLI is still Webpack based. So in the long term, we probably want to eventually migrate VCLI to be Vite based. So VCLI in terms of scope is a little bit higher level than Vite because it also includes scaffolding. Yeah. It has more built-in scaffolding. It has this like its own plugin system, which I don't know if we want to keep if we eventually migrate to Vite, but VCLI lives at a higher level where it's Vite specific, has more scaffolding, and also gives you more opinionated integration with like text runners and all that stuff. So it's an even more complete solution. So it's interesting, yeah. So Vite is like higher level than Webpack, but lower level than VCLI, somewhere in between.
Got it. And yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing things like that being integrated with VCLI because I like the dependency you get with VCLI because I spend a lot of time working through different frameworks and different projects that I have to context switch quite a bit, especially in my role at GitHub. We just ship a lot of random stuff and then move on to the next thing. I think it's like a DevRel thing, really. And I imagine folks who do like they do a lot of production sites and like agencies. So my question is Vite extendable in other different frameworks and within the JavaScript ecosystem?
Yeah, definitely. So there's several different ways to look at it. So first of all, Vite is framework agnostic, so you can use it to work with almost any like front-end framework of choice. And then Vite itself exposes a pretty well-defined JavaScript API, so you can use Vite inside a higher-level tool. So an example is VitePress, which is a static site generator that is built on top of Vite. It actually wraps Vite internally and does a bunch of opinionated stuff on top of it, which I can probably showcase a bit.
Do you have something to share?
Not really, but it's pretty cool because it doesn't really need like I really like this live stream that I can just show how it works instead of talking about it. Actually,
yeah. I personally we talked about this before we were live, but I love the fact that I know a lot of folks are on the stream have been here before on Open Source Friday, but it's an opportunity for us to have conversations about projects, open up the web browser and talk as opposed to like a podcast where you have to talk high level and sort of walk through different patterns without getting to actually show it. And then I don't have to read the show notes, but it's nice to see you just give us the examples right here, right in front of us.
Yep. All right, so I'm going to just like quickly get Tailwind going because so this is just installing a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to use darn add b with all these Tailwind stuff, right? So these are just like standard dependencies that Tailwind wants you to install. And once you install that, I'm going to Tailwind. Wait, is that Tailwind CSS N&W? So if you're wondering why I was able to run that without the npx prefix, because I configured my path to include the node modules in the current directory. So I can always run the things in the current node modules in the current directory without any prefix.
Okay, that's just your personal development environment. Yeah,
that's just the thing that I do.
Okay, I mean, the other thing I love about this is I get to learn from other people who are how to write code. Like, I'm pair programming with you, but I'm really just sort of in the passenger seat watching you code. And but yeah, I love this.
Cool. So we got
this as well. Just a heads up.
So I just created this Tailwind config, this post CSS config. So there's really nothing special to do here other than this thing. I mean, this is kind of somewhat Vue specific. So we'll ignore this because this is like a Tailwind specific thing. But this is the source code you want to actually just copy and put here, and just re-enable this. And then so page is actually already reloaded. So I think I should have Tailwind CSS in there. So I want to I don't use Tailwind CSS and just like pop enough. I think something like class equals 3xl. No. I don't use Tailwind.
Actually, if anybody's a Tailwind expert, if you want to drop whatever the it's text-3xl.
Yep, text-3xl.
See, this is the other thing, the mom programming with Twitch.
So it doesn't really work. Wondering why it's not working. Let's see.
Yeah, there's some other. I don't know if you have the chat open, but text-xs. Yeah, everybody's now searching the docs for you too as well.
Yeah. Wait, it's not actually updating the index.html.
Does it need to be,
because I'm actually overwriting it here.
Okay,
yeah. So now text3xl still isn't really working. So style.css. So the cool thing another thing I want to showcase here is when you're debugging with something like Vite, because we don't concatenate everything. So the easiest way to debug stuff is just looking at the network tab, because every module is actually an individual request here. So I'm just going to look at this, and it's not really doing anything.
Yeah.
I think this is because I didn't restart the server.
Is that just importing the Tailwind library?
There you go.
File?
Oh, there you go.
Okay, something changed.
Yeah, so I restarted the server because it didn't load the post CSS config previously. It cached I added the post CSS config, and the server was like, I didn't notice it's already here. So
yeah, well, that just goes to show that even FMU needs to debug sometimes. Can't just live code on whim.
Yeah.
Okay, and then just looking at the index.html, we're not importing the CSS. Oh, we are. Line 2. Got it.
We're using this link here. So it works. As you can see, post CSS also works over these normal links, right? Because this is treated as a dependency in VLAN as well. So if you have like nested app imports inside the CSS file, we also trace all of that. We also kind of record the module graph, the dependency chain. So when you edit like nested app imported CSS files, we also do hot module replacement and all that. Okay, so that's if I think we're gonna wrap it up here for CSS. Actually, maybe also showcase something like I'm going to do yarn add the Sass. So I'm just installing Sass itself, and I'm going to create a new file called style.scss, and then color red. Is that the syntax? So I wrote some SCSS, and I'm going to just link it like this. So yeah, so you install Sass, and then you can use Sass or SCSS, and it just works like this. Of course, you can also do it like this if you want. Works the same way. Or you can do something like this. Also works, right? So most of the conventional stuff that you expect that should work, it probably will work. Okay. And this is because we didn't do anything here, so I'm just going to change this to style.scss and reload the page.
Nice. And then real quick, going back to the Vite config, we didn't do much to set this up. We did create some Postgres. That was a config that we had before, so we didn't really do anything to
make this work. Yeah, we didn't really, this is actually unnecessary because I was just showing how you can customize CSS modules.
Yeah, okay, excellent.
Yeah. So technically, like anything you don't need, just like remove them and it doesn't affect anything. Like if you just want Sass, like this is all you need to work with Sass. Like,
And this is gonna be too complicated to just figure out everything today. So I'm probably gonna have to remove everything that I did so far and go again in the route that I was going before.
So really, like, it's more like if you want to go the super minimal route, like you just have your HTML CSS in JavaScript, optionally with post CSS or a preprocessor. Like this is not much from a static file server, except it magically knows some of the stuff that you want to use. Okay, so this is for people who want to just like have a a smarter server, right?
Yeah.
But we can do more than this, obviously.
So
right?
the one use case that I have, and because I've been doing so much Twitch streaming this year, and we just had a live stream last week, me and Michelle, Michelle from Australia. I know I was taking a distinction, but we built a Twitch bot. And one thing I've noticed with things like OBS, so like right now we're leveraging OBS to get everything on the screen at the moment, is that it has a JavaScript runtime. And I've been messing around with using like Deno and JS time inside of OBS. I haven't really published anything that works yet, but I'm curious if things like we talked about TypeScript, but what about things like Deno? Will that be compatible?
Deno probably, so Deno is a whole different story because Deno is its own thing. So Vite is currently built on top of Node.js APIs, so it's not going to be trouble to get it running in Deno.
Okay, let's get to that.
All right, so let's see what we can do next. I'm going to add a dependency now. So let's say I want to use React, right? All right, so I added React and React DOM, and so anytime in JS. We probably want to change this to JSX because we're going to use some JSX. So I'm going to say import React from React, import React DOM from React DOM. I think that's how it works. So forgive me because I'm actually React DOM.render.
We'll change the watch React.
Yeah, get element ID app maybe. So that means we need to have something here. So I'm going to say build app, and so the main thing I'm actually here is not really like React, but we need an app, right? So function app return h1 hello. So let's see. Nope. Of course, because we changed it to JSX. Yeah, so I'm going to change it here. All right, so hello world. So this is rendered by React. And as you can see, JSX just kind of worked out of the box as well. You don't need to configure anything. It kind of just worked. So same for like, so if you use TSX, and let's just like export function app like this. So remember, you need React because we are using the React 16 transform. And instead of that, I'm going to say imports app from app, and it works the same way. Right? So TypeScript, JSX, TSX works out of the box. You can just import them and they just work. You didn't even need to install TypeScript itself. The assumption here is you will likely be doing type check and run. So when you're developing, your IDE probably knows something, right? So say you can add a TS topic here, and your IDE will start linking these TS files and give you errors and warnings. So Vite itself doesn't care about any of the type checks. All it does is transform the syntax into actual JavaScript, and the browser can understand. And it does that using ESCO. So this is where we start to actually already leverage ESCO in two places after this one. The first is ESCO is transforming DJS and TSX files into plain JS for us.
Yeah, this is the file when I made it with vanilla JavaScript. I don't wanna try stuff just for the sake of trying because I already tried everything here, so I think the only thing that is left is just to search for the source code. But this is like, it seems too complicated. I don't understand like how does it go from this page here to there. It's exporting this stuff here. Because the problem is I don't understand how it works under the hood when it, like, in the yarn dev command, how does it work to run everything? And how everything is connected with everything else. So it becomes harder to understand what is going on. Like when, because I don't know like what process or what thing is calling this function here. And then how does this object here is passed around to this function? Where is this function? I guess it doesn't seem like it's on this file, but it's exported there as the letter and then is on one of these files here. And then there's a bunch of stuff going on to make it work. So it's just gonna take too much time if I try to understand how everything works, like in one day. And I obviously tried stuff asking ChatGPT as well, but it just gives me the standard answers, which is to use onMount or to use dynamic imports. And I tried both of them and it doesn't work. So I don't understand why. I do understand why. It's because of the server side rendering thing. But it's just like there's no. It seems like there's no option to make it work. Unless I'm doing something wrong, obviously. Could be possible. And when I'm trying to apply this stuff here on the documentation. And this is the parts that they talk about, that you can put this variable here on this plus page. But I tried that and it doesn't work. And there's no errors as well. That's the problem. Because then, like, there's no easy way for me to know exactly where does the problem come from. And when it comes to log stuff, also shows like normally, like it is rendering the application, it's just not rendering the stuff. And the code is exactly the same as the one that is on the vanilla.js. And on vanilla.js it works, it displays the stuff there. But here it's not working, so it has to be because this is rendered on the server, and then for some reason, like when it loads here, it doesn't work, and I try like this, and also doesn't work with dynamic imports, and also doesn't work with on mount here. So it's something about the way that Pixie updates the state of these containers here, and the way that it renders the canvas with the application when it interacts with Svelte, the way that Svelte handles the state. And also the error that I was getting before last time was because of the Chrome extension. One of these Chrome extensions there, so it wasn't related. Something about the proxy.
Glossary. The hydration per mailing. Svelte components store some state and update the DOM when the state is updated. When fetching data during SSR, by default SvelteKit will store this data and transmit it to the client along with the server rendered HTML. The components can then be initialized on the client with that data without having to call the same API endpoints again. Svelte will then check that the DOM is in the expected state and attach event listeners in a process called hydration. Once the components are fully hydrated, they can react to changes to their properties just like any newly created Svelte component. In SvelteKit, pages will be hydrated by default, but you can turn off JavaScript with the CSR equals false page option. Pre-rendering per mailing. Pre-rendering means computing the contents of a page at build time and saving the HTML for display. This approach has the same benefits as traditional server-rendered pages, but avoids recomputing the page for each visitor and so scales nearly for free as the number of visitors increases. The trade-off is that the build process is more expensive and pre-rendered content can only be updated by building and deploying a new version of the application. Not all pages can be pre-rendered. The basic rule is this: for content to be pre-renderable, any two users hitting it directly must get the same content from the server, and the page must not contain actions. Note that you can still pre-render content that is loaded based on pre-rendered pages are not limited to static content. You can build personalized pages if user-specific data is fetched and rendered client-side. This is subject to the caveat that you will experience the downsides of not doing SSR for that content as discussed above. In SvelteKit, you can control pre-rendering with the pre-render page option and pre-render config in svelte.config.js. Routing per Mailink, a single page app, SPA, is an application in which all requests to the server load a single HTML file which then does client-side rendering of the requested contents based on the requested URL. All navigation is handled on the client side in a process called client-side routing with per-page contents being updated and common layout elements remaining largely unchanged. SPAs do not provide SSR, which has the shortcoming described above. However, some applications are not greatly impacted by these shortcomings, such as a complex business application behind a login where SEO would not be important and it is known that users will be accessing the application from a consistent computing environment. In SvelteKit, you can build a SPA with adapter static SS per Mailink. Static site generation, SSG, is a term that refers to a site where every page is pre-rendered. SvelteKit was not built to do only static site generation like some tools and so may not scale as well to efficiently render a very large number of pages as tools built specifically for that purpose. However, in contrast to most purpose-built SSGs, SvelteKit does nicely allow for mixing and matching different rendering types on different pages. One benefit of fully pre-rendering a site is that you do not need to maintain or pay for servers to perform SSR. Once generated, the site can be served from CDNs, leading to great time to first byte performance. This delivery model is often referred to as Jamstack. In SvelteKit, you can do static site generation by using adapter static or by configuring every page to be pre-rendered using the pre-render page option or pre-render config in svelte.config.js. SSR per Mailink. Server-side rendering, SSR, is the generation of the page contents on the server. SSR is generally preferred for SEO. While some search engines can index content that is dynamically generated on the client side, it may take longer even in these cases. It also tends to improve perceived performance and makes your app accessible to users if JavaScript fails or is disabled, which happens more often than you probably think. In SvelteKit, pages are server-side rendered by default. You can disable SSR with the SSR page option.
I think I want to try this thing here.
Static site generation. To use SvelteKit as a static site generator, SSG, use adapter static. This will pre-render your entire site as a collection of static files. If you'd like to pre-render only some pages and dynamically server render others, you will need to use a different adapter together with the pre-render option. Usage per Mailink. Install with npm id at svelte.g/adapter static, then add the adapter to your svelte.config.js. Svelte.config.js import adapter from at svelte.g/adapter static, export default kit, adapter, //default options are shown. On some platforms / these options are set automatically and add the pre-render option to your root layout. src/root/plus layout.js//
And the problem is that's not what I want. I want the pre-render. I want the client-side thing.
You must ensure SvelteKit's trailing/option is
So I
set.
think this is not gonna work.
You must ensure SvelteKit's trailing/option is set appropriately for your environment. If your host does not render /a.html upon receiving a request for /a, then you will need to set trailing/ always to create /a/index.html instead. Zero config support per Mailink. Some platforms have zero config support, more to come in future. Versal. On these platforms, you should the directory to write pre-rendered pages to. It defaults to build assets permalink. The directory to write static assets, the contents of static, plus client-side JS and CSS generated by SvelteKit, to. Ordinarily this should be the same as pages, and it will default to whatever the value of pages is, but in rare circumstances,
I don't think this is gonna work. Not even gonna try. I think I'm gonna stop here. I'm exhausted, and I'm probably not gonna be able to figure out. So I'm gonna have to go the other route with doing the way that I was doing before. Or I think I might consider just doing with vanilla JavaScript as well. But I think what I will probably do is just try to go the other route by starting with this one here and then trying to modify this one so that I get the graph that I want. And I think I'm not going to be able to figure this out because I tried everything and I couldn't find any information on this. But I think I would think about it as well because like my biggest concern is that like most of the frameworks are going to be server-side rendered, and this is going to be a problem anytime that I want to build something with the canvas. So eventually I'm going to have to figure this out. That's the problem. But the thing is that because I'm doing the nights and weekends thing, I only have 6 weeks. So it's one of those things where like I'm not really sure, because the more time I spend on this, the less time I have to actually build stuff to have something to show. So I don't really know like how much time to spend on this, trying to figure this out. But I think like it is important and I should try to figure out. And it's just weird to me that like it's so hard to find information about it. So maybe I'm looking in the wrong way, I don't know. Because it should be a common problem, unless like the standard way to do things is when you want to build a site with a canvas, you should do it with vanilla.js, but I don't think that's the case. Like it doesn't make a lot of sense. And obviously I think there's like maybe I should try to do it without using SvelteKit and just using Svelte, so that it renders everything on the client side. That's another alternative, but I'm not sure if I like that much. Because I think that the way that you do it is you just change here. Instead of using this one, you use the other plugin that is for Svelte, but then you have to handle the routing in a different way. But I think I might try that as well. I'm not really sure. Yeah, I don't know which way to go about it. Because the problem is that like depending on the way that I go about here, it might be more difficult in the long term as well. So if I go this other route, it might be easier, like because it works. But then the problem is, since I'm not going to be using a library, I'm going to have to do everything by myself. And it is very hard to do stuff with WebGL, and I'm not sure how hard it's going to be or how long it's going to take until I have something. So it's kind of hard to decide which way to go about it. But I think I'm not going to be able to figure out like what's the problem here in the way that I'm currently doing things. So I don't know, I'll have to think about it. I think I'll come back 2 days from now and probably continue to do this. So I think the main ones that I'm going to contemplate is they're going to be to remove everything that I did now and go back to doing from this point here, this simple graph, and then building stuff on top of it, or trying to do it with just Svelte and then removing SvelteKit, and then trying to do it from the client, trying to remove the server-side rendering. Or I'm gonna see, but vanilla.js I think is the one that is less likely, but I'm not really sure. Maybe I'll do it with vanilla.js. The problem is then like it's not that scalable, I think. But I don't know, from the tutorials I've seen from stuff related to WebGL and Pixie and all this other stuff, like I couldn't find any videos of people doing it with a framework. So I don't know, but this guy does it with Vue. But I think that I'm gonna have the same problem if I choose Vue or any other of these frameworks, because it's the same issue. I think the problem is that all of these frameworks are gonna work with server-side rendering to optimize SEO. But then because the library requires the required canvas and it's complicated to update the state of the canvas, I think that's like there's something that happens under the hood on the state management that fucks up the library, that it doesn't load there. Maybe I can also search for other libraries as well. But the issue is that so many options that it's hard to think about. And then I might run into the same problem with the other libraries. So yeah, I have to think more about if there's, maybe I'll think about if there's another way to try to understand what is going on here, or try to search for the information. But yeah, probably gonna continue this 2 days from now.